Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're lucky enough to get to speak with Odella Howe, author of
Hi.
hello, author of The Violin. And honestly, this is not a genre I read too much of, and it was just so easy to get lost in. I think the world building that went into the story, it had such detail and it was done in a way that felt so accessible that I didn't feel like I needed to go to a museum to understand it. It felt like I was reading from within a museum, which in itself was really, really cool. And with all the twists and turns that went on, this could just be because I'm a very literal reader. They all went over my head until like the climaxes were happening, which was fantastic. But yeah, you wrote an incredible story that was so lovely to get lost in, especially with the way you opened it when it comes to like the time lapse or whatnot. I thought that that was a really unique way to do it. So hats off to you.
Thank you so much. You
Unlike
know,
Ryan, I'm a big horror fan. So the minute
yeah.
I picked it up, I was like, oh, hold on, this is like Faust. This is something wicked this way comes. This is like classic Gothic kind of horror, which I'm guessing is something that you're a fan of as
Oh
well.
yeah.
Okay.
I have said like I feel like a lot of horror fans have read picked up a Stephen King book at way too early of an age. I think I read Pet Cemetery when I was like 9. Um
Yep, that'll do
and,
it. Yep.
The Shining, I think I read at 11 and I reread it like last year for the first time as an adult and I'm like, "Oh wow, I missed a lot of this." You know.
Yeah, yeah. I had similar experience. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was young because people in my family really liked Stephen King, and so much of it went over my head initially. I think I don't know if you've got children or anything, Adela, but
Yeah.
uh, like getting married and getting a house and having kids and stuff, the horror takes on a totally different kind of,
Oh yeah.
doesn't it? Yeah, it's a really weird experience. You reread these things again. I found that with a lot of books actually. But I wanted to start off the bidding today with your relationship to horror, especially like gothic horror and classic horror. And it sounds like that started at a young age.
Oh yeah. Um, I mean, I was the kid who always rechecked out those scary stories to tell in the dark. Like they scared the
Oh,
crap out
those
of
yeah,
me,
those
and I
those
would
were
still listen to
intense.
them.
Those were
You know?
intense.
Yeah. Like I mean that one story really lives rent free in my mind where it's like the medical student and she's like losing her mind and like one of their her cohorts play a prank on her and like put a cadaver hand where the like light switch should be. And so she like grabs the hand to pull. Yeah, anyway, that lives rent free in my mind. Um, but I've always loved those kind of stories. I've always loved Edgar Allan Poe, even though I don't think I've ever really been smart enough to quite understand it. Um,
I was going to bring up Poe because I got a little bit of Poe from this as well.
Yeah.
Some partly in the language. I know Poe tends to write from a more kind of detached perspective sometimes, whereas this was much more involved in the characters and stuff. They were really what carried a lot of the horror. You know, it was much
mm,
more like emotional horror almost. But what what's your favorite Edgar Allan Poe story? And I'll completely judge you on it.
I know. I was gonna say. I know it's so cliche, but the Raven, that
Oh
or the
yeah,
Black
I think
Cat.
that's everyone's favorite. Yeah.
Oh, I like the Black Cat one to be fair.
Yeah. I realized recently because my son got one of the illustrated classics, the Edgar Allan Poe ones,
Mm.
and I was like, oh, the Cask of Amontillado. I was like, oh, that's the one with the cat, and I was like, no, that's I've been mixing those stories in my mind, so those are separate stories. You know, it's like no,
Yeah.
that's. But I was like, no, he just has a lot of people on the walls and in the floors. I don't know.
I was going to say
He was
the
an
cask of
interesting guy.
Amontillado is that's the one where he puts his enemy in the wall, right? Yeah.
Yep, and then the cat is walled in with it and like
Yeah.
alerts police.
But when it comes to like just the gothic setting, as someone myself who does not read horror, which is why it like Steve and I can bounce off each other pretty well because I could say something is terrifying and he can go off and be like, this is young adult. Um,
Mm.
and I think when it comes to this, it had the elements of it, especially towards the end, but it more felt like there was just intense foreshadowing throughout. Like we all knew what was gonna happen, especially when it
Mhm.
came to the father. But granted, like for myself, when it came to the deal with the devil, I was like, What? Um, but that's just my inability to read into things. Was there research that had to go into creating such a Gothic setting, or is this just something you were able to riff?
I had to do a lot of research, even things as far as like what color clothes they would wear. Because I remember hearing, like, I went to a museum a while back and it was talking about how, like, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Joseph Vermeer, when he painted the girl with the pearl earring, like, he had to
Oh
spend
yeah.
his life savings to get the color blue because it
Hmm.
wasn't a common color. I can't remember what the substance was called. And so I was like, okay, they can't, there's certain clothing colors that wouldn't be realistic. And so I found myself on a lot of rabbit holes where it was like, okay, uh, I'm pretty sure there's a point at which Cassius is wearing like purple, and that's significant
Oh
because
yeah.
purple is not very common.
Yeah.
It's a
The
lot more
color of
expensive.
kings.
Yeah. And so like there's stuff like that. Or every now and then I would use like a phrase and I was like, I don't think that makes any sense. I don't think they have that technology and I don't think that would make any sense. So I have to rephrase that.
Fair
In
enough. I mean,
the time period was almost like a character in itself. I think that played into the horror as well. It's much easier, I think, to write horror before the age of the iPhone,
Yeah.
but the further back you go, the more isolated it's easier to make people feel, and the harder it is to communicate across distance and stuff. It feels like it's kind of taking place in this little isolated kind of time period. I
Hmm.
really love that. It plays well into the gothic horror element. Speaking of dressy, like clothes and stuff, I have a friend who's really into dressmaking, and we play Dungeons and Dragons together. And whenever she designs her cat, she likes to draw her characters. And wait, I can see Ryan rolling his eyes because how long was that? 3 minutes before I brought up Dungeons and Dragons.
you're
But
golden.
she gets really into how the dresses are made and how they were made way back when
Hmm.
versus nowadays and stuff. So I want to know about all the research that you've done, not just for the dress and the wearing and the even things like the architecture and stuff, but also for the construction of musical instruments.
Oh, the violin itself, there was so much
Yeah.
research that I also didn't make it in the story. Like my editor was like, "You're not writing like a manual how to build a
Yeah.
violin. You need to take some of this out." I was like, "Okay, but like I did so much research to collect it. I can't use it."
Well,
He's like, "No,
isn't
you
that
can't."
isn't that what made a part of what makes Moby Dick stand out? Is there's like 60 pages that's just how whales work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, he really wanted to write like a fishing manual, but um he had to insert a story so someone
Yeah,
would read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly that.
But so one thing that inspired the whole story was, and I've talked about this before, I think, is listening to Camille Saint-Saëns' Dance Macabre and
Yes.
that whole like tone poem. And that got me researching violins and finding out things like people will like they'll take a violin and like put it in a like a chest and play some of the masters to it because they feel like it changes the wood. And
Right. Yeah.
and where it's like it's this absorbing instrument um and they mentioned in it where it's like there could be an instrument can be finicky, it can be easy, it can be whatever depending on the knots in the wood, the grain of the wood, the type of wood, the varnish, everything. Um, and so like I found a bunch of books. There's like it was like a start to finish. Like you could take it and you could go in your personal workshop and make a violin. I didn't do
Sweet.
that, of course, but it was
Uh,
like I
I,
went through that step by step and
I was gonna say how many violins were made in the writing of this story.
zero. We were in a two-bedroom apartment with four kids. Like,
That's a horror all of its own. Yeah.
yes. Oh my gosh.
But I mean that said though, it does come off that the research was made because or the research was conducted because at the end of the day, whether or not we actually know how to make a violin, the workshop process was in depth. And more so from that, it was also I really liked how the social implications were at play as well. Like, yeah, you could learn to make this, but you also need to think about your future given a time period and everything
Mhm.
like that. There's a level of independence, unfortunately, you're not necessarily going to have.
Yeah.
And I think it was really, really interesting to, well, it helped put us in her shoes a little bit better, which I quite appreciated as well.
I'm glad. There's definitely an element of like learned helplessness with her character.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I've heard people say she doesn't have a lot of agency. I'm like, that's the point.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't feel like she has the agency. Like this is the first thing that she's really tried to do. And it's still at
Yeah.
the behest of a man who's making her promises
Yeah,
that
I
she
was
can't
gonna
really
say,
keep.
I think that's the big thing is that even though it's one of the first instances where she's doing and she's taking the initiative to do something herself, it's not necessarily for her.
Hmm.
It's it's a way for her to resolve her grief or to settle her grief. But I think throughout the story, we're sitting there, we're like, this isn't gonna fix your problems. This isn't gonna work. Like we're hoping it does, but obviously that leads to bigger issues down the road.
Hmm.
Something I was curious about while I was reading was if you're musical yourself, Adela.
A little bit. I really love music, but I am not really musical myself. Like I played Wonderwall in middle school.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I
but
did it in college, I understand.
yeah.
Um,
Because I thought, for someone then who's not like a classically trained musician, then I thought you did a spectacular job of pretending that you were when you were writing the
Thank
book.
you.
I thought it came off really well. Yeah, I was like, oh, I bet. I wonder if she plays violin. Like, I got the feeling that she must have some familiarity with this.
No, and like I love music. My husband and I actually have season tickets to the ballet. Like
oh, nice,
Oh,
nice.
that's
nice.
our that was our anniversary gift to each other last year, and that's the same thing this year. It's like I love music, classical ballet. Like my maybe not so secret ambition is to someday see the violin turned into a ballet. Kind of like I saw
Mm.
Jekyll and
Oh,
Hyde in the form of ballet last year, and that was amazing.
Was it?
that would be pretty cool.
That would be very cool. Um, Honestly, going back to the point where like violins are the instrument that we feel can absorb a lot, because obviously there's a lot of
Mhm.
lore between the devil and the violin, devil and the fiddle.
Yeah,
That was it always going to be a violin?
yeah,
That's fair.
And did the story start? Like, where did the genesis of the idea come from? Then, also, I love saying that phrase. I think I say that every interview.
yeah.
Where
Genesis.
did the violin come first, or was it the Gothic horror elements that came first? Like, where did it all come from?
Well, the violin came first, and then I just always envisioned it being this like back in the day, you know. It did take different forms where I was like, at first I had her losing a child, I had her losing all,
Mm,
all sorts of things, but then it ended up being William, her fiance. Um, and you see some elements of the original like stories I came up with later in the story, but
I
yeah.
think that's also such
Part,
a.
part
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say part of me thought that the initial idea might have been the Museum of Oddities, the Museum of
Oh
Curiosities.
yeah.
Yeah, this was a Ripley's Believe It or Not. I saw that from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that actually came way later because I
Oh,
had this
really?
guy and I was like, well, why is he there? What does he want? What's his point?
Mm,
He just wants a violin. What's the deal?
yeah.
And then yeah, when I was a kid, I used to go to Ripley's Believe It or Not all the time. I lived in Tacoma, Washington, and so like we went to Yield Curiosity Shop all the time. Um and
Yeah.
so I was like, that would be so cool. And I actually learned that the guy who ran the Yield Curiosity Shop started in like a wagon. It was like more
Okay.
traveling type of thing. And I loved that.
There's something about having the wagon of oddities because like you're just going from town to town and like you don't, especially if you put yourself in the time frame or you put yourself in the mindset as they would have had back then. Traveling was not the luxury we have today. Like
Mhm.
you weren't gonna be just leaving your village for a weekend to go somewhere or this or that, or maybe
Yeah.
special occasions. So the idea of that there's somebody roaming, who knows what would be even a village over, let alone two, three, or halfway around the world.
Hmm. And he mentions that where it's like, oh, you don't believe the mermaid can exist because, there's a narwhal.
Yeah,
There's all these crazy
exactly.
things.
I think we fall into this where it's like Out of all the animals, sorry for throwing you under the bus here, Steve, and you guys and your national animal, but like the fact that unicorns don't exist but giraffes do is
Right?
such like a like why? It's so much harder to think that a giraffe would exist over
Even kangaroos, you're
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
Um, and I think especially if we go back to the era, like you guys were saying before a phone or whatnot, like this is all uncommon knowledge. Like no one would know this, or you might have one encyclopedia that was printed that then becomes kind of law.
mhm.
Which is quite an interesting, I guess, position to be in. But yeah.
And it's
It's
also a bit
certainly
tongue in cheek because the mermaid that gave me the idea for his mermaid is at the old curiosity shop, and it was actually made from a monkey skeleton and a fish
Yeah.
skeleton. Like it
It,
is, like
it's the
it is
fake
a
one.
fabrication.
It's
So it's
it's the
also a
fake
little bit
one.
funny. Like
yeah.
he may have some fake stuff, but also he has some real stuff.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was curious about because I think I was having this conversation with one of the people in the book club about it, and we are talking about how like how much of this is real, how much of this is fake, because
Mhm.
you go to Ripley's Believe It or Not, and you're like, okay, yeah, sure. But then you also like you have these moments with Cassius where like the medicine is helping his dad, like that her dad, like that is not just placebo effect
Mhm.
because he doesn't know what's going on. So there is truth to it, which I think also made it really unique in that regard.
And I think for him, it's he knows how to show. He knows what catches people's attention. He-
Hmm.
He's like, this stuff isn't showy. I can't show this. I need something flashy, but this is real too. And he's like, the story is what I'm selling. And he's like, I
Yeah.
get to know what's
Yeah.
real and I get to enjoy it.
I think that was the part that kept me guessing because, as I said earlier, unlike Ryan, I'm very familiar with Gothic horror and I'm very familiar with all the tropes. And as soon as I got into it, it was like, right, I'm going to get comfy and enjoy watching this poor woman's life fall apart because it's
I
Gothic
know,
horror,
right? It's
and obviously that's exactly what's going to happen. It's all in the execution, you know. But it was the tightrope that you managed to walk like that. Like, is it all real? Is part of this real? Sometimes he knows what he's talking about. Some of it's show, some of it's not. But then, well, spoilers, we're getting to it, but like
yeah.
literally the devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also it's one of those things where, and we've seen this in a few YPQ stories now, where the devil's portrayed in such a different light than what you would see in the media or this or that. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to say like I think everyone inherently has their own agenda, but it is interesting to see them in this kind of in this different light where there is room for interpretation. And like obviously the ending was the way that it ended, but I don't know. Like I got a soft spot for him. I do.
Me too.
There's we keep doing this. We've accidentally featured quite a few books that have got the devil in
Yeah.
them in different forms. And I always love to ask because it's one of my favorite topics. I love reading books that have the devil
Yeah.
in them. Who's your favorite fictional depiction of the devil?
I don't
Out with your
know.
own work.
Sorry.
Said out with your own work, obviously.
I know, right? I'm not sure. I really like I mean, I don't know if it's a depiction of the devil, but I mean, I like Dante's Inferno and the
Mm.
world
Oh yeah.
built there. But then I don't watch a lot of horror because it just like I'm kind of a scaredy cat. I just I don't like jump scares. Crawling things. I hate it. But but I have a soft spot for the Omen series. Like
Mm.
they did the
I love the
new
Omen.
prequel of it, and I love those.
Was
Um,
that the first Omen with the where it's the nun?
yeah, where
Yeah, I love
it's like
that
this whole
film. Loved it.
conspiracy of like the Catholic Church
Yeah,
to create the Antichrist. It's like I love it.
yeah. I'm a big fan. I think off the top of my head, mine's is probably Peter Stormare in Constantine, where he's got the tar dripping off his feet and everything, but he's really
Oh yeah,
funny and kind of charming and like
yeah,
he's like
and
trying to light Constantine's cigarette for him and stuff, and it just like a bit of a horror, like he's a horrible, horrible person thing, whatever, but still an angel and still almost kind of human. I don't know. I
Oh
really
yeah.
like the depictions of the devil where he's likable and charming because of course he is.
And it only makes sense because I mean if you come at people hard and fast and like brutal, then no one likes you, but like you have to it of course the devil would be charming.
Yeah. Huh.
I also watched The Devil's Advocate recently for the first time, and barring Keanu Reeves' accent, God bless him, we all love Keanu, but he can't do Texas. Al Pacino in that was great for how like calm and relaxed he is in everything that he does. Because Al Pacino's usually shouty and
Yeah.
quite loud and everything. But I really like. Did you pull on anything particularly for your inspiration for writing this interpretation of the devil, or was it kind of like made from whole cloth?
Um, it would be hard to say it was made from whole cloth because I'm sure that lots of influences came into it, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't name a specific one. That makes
I feel you. I
Well,
think it's really hard to I think for any writer to ever say that anything's made completely out of
Mhm.
the ether. Like everything's a kind of combination of everything that we're inspired by, right?
Mhm.
And speaking of, so we're talking about devils and ghosts and stuff. I understand that you got your start as a ghostwriter,
Yeah.
and now you're literally a ghostwriter. Tell me a little bit about ghostwriting. It's something I don't know much about, despite
Yeah. So
having like way
most of
more.
my ghostwriting was actually for like blog posts. So like if people had a blog,
Okay.
say they had like a sponsored post and it's like, hey, I liked this, this, and this about it. Can you write it and into a narrative so that it
Yeah.
sounds good and all that? And so I'd write that and then they would take it and post it and I would pay rent. And
Getting paid to write things is surprisingly difficult. So hats off if you can manage it.
thank you.
That's pretty cool.
say
I'm
speaking.
going to jump on top of Ryan before he asks a question here again because I've got loads that I want to ask. This happens a lot too. But what really struck me, and I'm always looking out for what my kind of what I think the standout thing that an author gets right is. And there's loads of great stuff about the gothicness and the atmosphere and the horror and the everything, but the characters I think were really what totally sold me on the violin. It's what I think made it stand out from just like your average spooky story
Mhm.
with a haunted violin or something. Tell me a little bit about how you go about making characters like Cassius and like Elise and everything. Like, where do you even start?
So it's kind of, I had this rough conception of them. And it was my first time writing a novel. And so I really had to, it was like I wrote the first draft and then like the second, third. And then it was like,
Was this your debut?
yeah.
Well done, mate. Well done.
Well, thank you.
I can usually tell. I can usually tell.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. Um, but and so I went into I can't remember his name, Dwight V. Swain. I read a lot of his books about like characterization and how he talks about, casting with type, casting against type, and making
Mm-hmm.
them whole characters. And so then I took that and structured characters kind of using those. But then, like Abel, like I want him to be a spoiled rich kid
Mm-hmm.
who can get anything he wants.
Yep.
you know, um, I wanted her to be this tragic character who has a really good relationship with her dad, but like that's kind of also her downfall because she's like that's a what else, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then William, I wanted him to be like, why does she love him? Why is he so impressive to her? And what
Mm-hmm.
about his goodness makes Abel's badness so repulsive?
Yeah, yeah, like the contrast between them.
Mhm.
That's really cool. I think it's nice because whenever I write something that has like a cast, you come up with the characters, but then you also have to come up with the characters in relation to one another.
Yeah.
Also, have we lost Odella? Are you still there?
Oh,
We've
there
lost
you
her.
go.
There we go. She's
I'm still
back.
here. My phone just like went
Oh, it did the sleep mode thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
let
you
me just
have to.
unlock it first.
Yeah, you have to build the characters again in relation to one another almost. Like,
Mhm.
how does this character relate to that character, and how does that shape them? did you go through that kind of like workshopping process then with them, where you tried a bunch of scenes and tried putting them in different situations to develop them? And
Oh yeah. And I have a bunch of writing where it's just like, I don't know what to do. Like, this is not working. What do I do? And I'm just like writing out and how much I hate it. And then finally it would like the dam would break and it's like, oh, there you go. That makes sense. You know,
that's
there's
funny.
like I had to
We
work
have
through it
that
a
in
little bit.
common. We have that in common. If I start writing one day and I don't really feel it coming, I'll write about how hard it is to write it. Or the classic one is you just like, introduce a, I don't know, a lion into the scene and see what happens. And then you never know. Sometimes that ends up working.
Oh, exactly.
Um, so one of the things I wanted to ask Steve is I forget the name, so I apologize for
No,
this
you're good.
in a minute. She has like her kind of, I guess, fail-safe backup plan that her dad's pushing her to marry.
Mhm.
Um, I think this was the one moment where I was reading the book where I was like, "Ooh, I don't know." When they bump him off to prolong the that's when I started kind of seeing the gears turning of okay, there are like very nefarious things at play here because why I don't
Yeah,
agree with them. I think
sure.
he's got his flaws, but was that a deserved way to go? I'm not necessarily sure in that instance, but it was a really cool dynamic in terms of like you have the backup option, which in a lot of situations, especially in that era, would have very much been like
Yeah.
not a backup option. That would have been the frankly the cream of the crop,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But it was really cool to see the dynamic with I think it was the father afterwards, because he seemed, all things considered, to have been accepting of it all.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what my point is with that. I just thought it was a
You're
really
good.
nice, really nice little thing.
I'm glad. I figured I'm like, if you just discover that someone can do something like that, then you're like, oh, I was wrong. I didn't, that changes everything.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask them was, given the role that music plays in the story, was there a set playlist or anything that you made or that you listened to when you were writing it? Or, like if it was to be made into a ballet, what would the kind of soundtrack, what would the kind of music be like for it?
So definitely a lot of the Saint Sands, the
Yeah,
dance
yeah.
macabre in general. But then there were a few Lindsay Sterling songs, The Guardian by Lindsay Sterling.
Classics.
Yeah. But I will say when I write, I don't have a lot of like serious music playing. I get in my own head
Mhm.
too much. And I have 4 kids, and so oftentimes like they've
Yeah.
become obsessed with this song, like I'm a coconut, and it's like I'm a coconut, coconut. Like that's my background noise.
I can't wait for the next book that you write, Odella, called The Coconut, about
It's just funny writing these like creepy scenes, and it's like Cocomelons playing in the background. I'm like, this doesn't match.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and power to you for being able to kind of work through that. I know, like when I'm in the zone when it comes to reading, or I remember when I was in college, like comes to writing, it needs to be so specific. Like I would have these just like instrumentals that I would play sometimes.
Oh
Otherwise,
yeah.
the moment there's lyrics in anything, I'm just completely out of it. I'm gone.
No, and if I really hit a writer's block, it's just like make a nice margarita, sit down.
Yeah. The Hunter S. Thompson approach, yeah.
I'm when it comes, I know you spoke of it a little bit in the book itself, or maybe this was when we called way back when. Was there was there inspiration for like the brand or the type of violin you were going for the entire time?
Yes. So the inspiration on that one, because I wanted to set it in America because I have been to Europe, but it's been, a while and I've spent maybe 2 weeks total there. So I'm like, huh. But that's where most violins are made. And so I had that kind of quandary, like, why are they making violins there? And so I started researching American violins, and I actually came across, I can't remember his name. Um, I can't remember his name and I can't search it because I'm using the phone. David Bromberg. He
Mm.
had a collection
Mhm.
of American made violins because he observed that they were just as good as the ones made in Italy, Germany, France, but they had a stigma about them because they were made in America and not in
Yeah.
any of those places. And so he collected them to show the history of American-made violins. And I thought that was so cool, especially when I learned that he had sold them to the Library of Congress and they were going to preserve them for posterity. And then I learned later that that deal actually fell apart and he had to sell the collection, like he had to disperse it. And so I was like, okay, he has to be an American violin maker. And that's part of his thing is like, I tried to be a violin maker, but no one wants my American violins.
Mhm.
He's like, I could only make so
That's such a
much.
yeah. That's a really cool little element of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting stigma behind it as well, because I think like there just is this idea of there's something about the old school tradition and culture because Europe's been around for a lot longer than we have,
Mhm.
and rightfully so. But
Yeah.
Saying nothing.
but no, I did like the element of it being not just like a deal with the devil, not just the fact that like a violin was involved, but the fact that we saw the craftsmanship that went into the violin and clearly how much it meant to her for multiple reasons. I think it was this hard juxtaposition between on one hand, she's she's kind of trying to balance and distract or ignore her grief by getting super involved in building a violin. But at the same time, it's the last project she's going, it's the last time she's going to spend with her father, which also adds such an intensity to it. Like,
Mhm.
I remember speaking in the book club meeting last week, there was this conversation about like, if you only had like 3 days left with your parent, how would you spend it? Would you spend it deep diving into something for something else? Or would you spend it just like being sad by the fireplace? Like I have no idea.
Mhm.
Well, we don't need to answer that question. It
I
was
was
more,
say
I
I
was
don't
gonna
know how to speak on
yeah,
that one.
I'm not answering that one.
yeah, we're all sitting pensive thinking that's a deep one.
Yeah, right. But it was just this element where like it did leave me thinking about like I don't know, at times I kind of felt bad for the dad. Like I knew that there was excitement that his daughter wanted to spend time with him, but I also knew it wasn't she had her own agenda.
Mhm.
And that was the element that kind of stood out to me about it.
And I don't know if you guys have kids.
No.
Okay. But
I've got one
I
on the way.
oh, congratulations. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah. But it's like there's an element to like where you almost don't resent them for the agenda, almost,
Mm.
where you're just like,
Mhm.
I find myself all the time. This is a much lower stakes thing, but where, they've been little assholes all day. And you're still like, you go to the store and you're like, oh, but they'd really like this, like, toy. And you end up getting it. And
Yeah.
you're like, why am I getting this for you? You don't appreciate anything, but I still want to get this for you because I love you so much and it makes you happy. You know?
I think it's part of the cycle of life as you gradually start to understand your own parents more and more as you become one. And as the kids grow up, you're like, oh, I remember when my sister had her children, and when they were about 5 or 6, she came to my mum. She was like, I'm so sorry for everything that I ever did. I had no idea.
No, like I've often joked. So, like, my degree is in psychology, and
Oh,
one
neat.
of my favorite classes was abnormal psychology, and how the teacher was saying how all abnormal psychology is just exacerbation of normal psychology. And so,
Mhm.
like, I think of that with my kids, where it's like, this is where Stockholm syndrome comes from. Like,
Yeah.
that's that's
Honestly, I can see it. I've got friends with kids and it's this weird juxtaposition right now, and it's like, wow, I don't know.
we're like,
But bro,
I
you're
love you
being
so
held
much, I would
hostage.
do anything for you. And it's like they'll listen to the most annoying songs, and you're like, I can't handle that. And then they're cute singing it, and you're like, well, it's not so bad. It's
Yeah.
it's not even fair.
I've got a lot of experience being the fun uncle, for lack of a
Yeah.
word, where I can just go in. I got my best friend's oldest. He's got a 6-year-old. I got him a drum set for Christmas last year. That was not
Oh,
appreciated
Ryan.
by the parents.
Are you the fun uncle or the arch nemesis?
A bit of both. He's known me
Yeah.
way too long. We're not related, so it's good. I can get away with it.
There you
Um, but
go.
I hate to be that guy. We have 90 seconds
You're
left.
good.
For people who have read the violin, they want to follow up, they want to read more of your work, what's the best way they can get a hold of you and all that?
So
And
right
what's
now,
next?
Yeah, what's
oh
next?
yeah. So best way to get a hold of me is on like Instagram right now or through my newsletter on my site, odellahowe.com. And then what's next? I have a novella that I'm working on that I'm hoping to come out in November. And that is kind of like, think like a Christmas Carol, but with a slumlord and a uh, vindictive tenant. And
I'm sold.
then
So
I cackled writing it. It's been really fun. And then I have another one that's coming out next year that's more of like a psychological thriller about a little girl who discovers her stepfather and the spider in her room. Neither of them are what they appear.
interesting.
Oh, I like the sound of this one as well.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. But more than anything, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we managed to make this work. Hats off to you again. And for those of you that managed to make it 40 minutes into an interview, the story was The Violin by Adela Howe. Please go read it.
Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.
You too. Bye.
It's been a pleasure.